Welcome to Sally Fox audiobook Gauls and Britons. 5 chapters 6080 word stopwatch tilde 24-minute read. Chapter 144 Gauls and Britons. 1218 words. At this time, the Britons hadn't yet fallen into endless slaughter and hatred with the Gauls as they would in the future. On the contrary, those who would later be mocked by Romans as Britannic savages were currently helping the Gauls invade Rome. It was only after young Caesar matured and became Imperator Gaius Julius Caesar, leading his armies to almost annihilate the Gauls, that the Britons entered Roman attention. Later, they were completely absorbed into the Roman Empire and became a province. But after the East-West Roman split, the weakened Western Roman Empire couldn't defend Britannia, and it was seized by the Saxons. The Western Roman Emperor simply abandoned the territory and fled. He left behind a single sentence telling the Britons to stand on their own feet and defend themselves with weapons, then shamelessly ran off. With no other choice, the Britons reverted to their ancient system from 800 years prior, establishing hundreds of scattered kingdoms across their lands. That's when the legendary tale of King Arthur began to take form. It could be said that Britannia had already been fully Romanized. It was Rome itself who had abandoned its own people and lands. No wonder that in the future, when the Sword Emperor of Eastern Rome tried to reconquer Britannia, the Britons, under King Arthur, vowed to resist unto death. You could only blame the mess left behind by Western Rome, which had utterly lost the people's hearts in Britannia. Let alone the fact that King Arthur of that era was hailed as invincible and undefeated, and the most legendary monarch of all. Which was why the Britons, who had once merged almost seamlessly with the Romans, would now fight back with all their might. Knight was deeply curious. Would the Britannia of this world also give birth to the legend of King Arthur? Even if not, if the Lady of the Lake truly existed, then those legendary swords would be treasures he'd never let slip by. Even if not for his own use, he could collect them, or in the future gift them to his most trusted subordinates to win hearts and loyalty. For someone like Knight, who had truly experienced abject poverty, especially after having survived the Greece era where every hero had 3 to 4 divine weapons each, the thought of their wealth still made his mouth water with envy. Sure, Hector had given him a lot of equipment before, and he'd looted a set from Achilles' template, but those were just conceptual forms. In the real world, he'd never actually touched any of them. And besides, who would ever complain about having too much treasure? Having already begun to show signs of being affected by his dragon lineage, Knight's personality had inevitably begun to adopt some of a dragon's greedy nature. And the truth was, he'd already noticed it himself. But he had no plans to resist it. If anything, he faithfully followed his desires. After all, desires are not particularly harmful as long as he didn't become obsessed and lose himself. It was fine. Humans live driven by desire. Many become slaves to it, blind and led by the nose, spiraling into decadence and rot. But there are also many who freely indulge, yet never abuse their power, always living with clarity and self-control, stopping just short of excess. The best contrast between these two extremes is the Roman Senate versus the hero King Gilgamesh, or the Senate's relationship with his condor, Alexander the Great. Back to reality. The one Knight had called on to start the vote, Strabo Pompey, had just moments ago confirmed a terrifying truth. The man standing before him was the very devil he once knew. That same man, back when Strabo was still a brash youth, had utterly suppressed him, humiliating him in front of countless citizens and noble peers. And when he heard that line, "So, who's in favor, and who's opposed?" The instant those familiar words reached his ears, Strabo Pompey could swear. Besides himself, over 20 senators visibly trembled. Damn! My DNA reacted. *T. That's a familiar flavor. Strabo Pompey, I agree. His voice was dry and hoarse. So many years had passed, and he had now become the new head of House Pompey. Logically speaking, in Rome's upper echelon, he had a stable footing. Even old foxes like Marius and Sulla had to win his favor, none would dare push him too hard. And yet, because of this one man, long absent from Rome, with no power or faction at all, he didn't even have the courage to oppose. He had planned to say something strong, but somehow, it turned into, "I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree too." One after another, many senators began to echo the vote. And now the senators unfamiliar with Knight were stunned. "What are you all doing? Have you lost your minds? We were ready to fight to the bitter end, and now our whole camp surrendered." "I object!" one bold, clueless young senator shouted in anger. And in the next instant, a crimson flash appeared before that senator. "Ah!" The senator let out a terrible scream and clutched his face. Blood streamed down his cheeks, his eye sockets were now empty. Standing beside him was Helena, wearing an innocent, sweet smile. She enjoyed fighting with Knight, but couldn't stand seeing anyone oppose him. If she hadn't remembered Knight saying these senators were still useful, she'd have already killed this one. Knight, who was watching all this, was a bit surprised. Helena had actually followed his words? To be honest, though she was tagging along beside him, Knight never thought he could actually command her. He only wanted to keep her calm temporarily. But he had to admit, Helena's sudden, ghost-like strike had scared the living daylights out of the senators. One even banged the table in fury. "Lord Lister Knight! What do you take this sacred senate for? You dare commit violence here?" In mighty Rome, there were indeed warriors who had inherited divine bloodlines or descended from heroes. The Senate had seen some inhuman beings before. But Helena was too fast. No one had seen how she moved. Such a monster, they had never encountered one so brutal and swift. The fact that some of them could even speak now was sheer rage barely holding back fear. The Senate could not be humiliated. As the supreme authority of Rome, they represented Rome's dignity. No matter how savage or powerful, none could make them bow, not so easily. And yet, this senator had no idea that the Senate's dignity had been utterly trampled decades ago by the very man standing before them. When noble lords were dragged like cattle into the central plaza for public trials, paddled and shamed by soldiers. Only then did the aristocrats understand that honor and dignity were worth less than a coin. Strabo Pompey now stayed silent. Compared to his brashness in youth, he had quietly shrunk into a corner. He didn't want to speak at all. House Pompey had already been crushed once by Lister Knight in the previous era. It had taken them this long to recover, no longer basking in former glory. Now? He absolutely didn't want to drag his family back into this mess. However, Chapter 145, Your uncle killed your other uncle, jealousy is the original sin. 1269 words. Lister Knight. This esteemed senator, I haven't moved at all, I'm just standing here. Lord Strabo Pompey can vouch for me. Knight spoke with a mocking curve at the corner of his mouth, nonchalant and calm. He didn't need to restrain Helena, even if she wanted to slaughter the entire Senate, it would be perfectly reasonable. She was, after all, the dragon of Carthage. Killing Roman nobles? That was basically tradition. The fact that she hadn't already transformed and gone on a rampage in the capital was already a gesture of respect to the 12 Olympians. And now that he was once again named, Strabo Pompey looked utterly miserable. This time, even though he didn't want to stand up, he had to. He was sure that the other party had definitely recognized him, otherwise he wouldn't have been making fun of him all the time. And he had witnessed with his own eyes how Lister Knight treated the young nobles as spies during the election for the tribune, and directly lied and killed them. He was well aware of the ruthlessness of this man. They will take action when they say so, without any regard for the so-called laws. It was better to say that the 12 tables were a tool for him to exert his tyranny and a high-sounding synonym for justice. The laws were basically defined by this guy, who held the upper hand. Anyone who was against him would be labeled a clown. It was just a typical large-scale double-standard scene. Now that there were no civilians present, it wasn't even a show at all. Thinking of this, Strabo Pompey said stiffly. Indeed, Sir Lister did not do it. We cannot insult the noble character of a nobleman because of some prejudice. Insulting aristocrats in Rome is punishable by death. I ask this senator to watch his words. Strabo Pompey's words instantly left the still screaming, eye-covering senator completely speechless. Are you King insane? I just had my eyes gouged out in front of everyone, and you're telling me I'm slandering him and even deserve the death penalty. The key point is, many of the elder senators had gone completely silent, a clear sign of tacit compliance. Back in the day, Knight dealt with them the same way. You think they never tried to resist? Those who dared say a single no ended up losing hands, losing heads, and the weeds on their graves are 3 feet tall by now. In the end, it was Marius who stepped forward to put a stop to this farce. He didn't even look at the injured senator, he simply stated that Lucius Caesar's proposal was not in accordance with proper procedure. Lucius Caesar? Then let's make it reasonable. I propose that Lord Lister Knight be tasked with resolving the current social war. If he can succeed in quelling the rebellion, then by merit alone, granting him private army privileges is perfectly justified. The social war. The very senators who were protesting seconds ago now froze in surprise. Rome had deployed massive legions, spent a fortune, and thrown countless generals and warriors into the conflict, yet had still failed to subdue the allied armies. Now you're saying one man can bring peace? Even if you allowed him to raise his own army, with a bunch of fresh recruits, there was no way he could defeat the vast and entrenched alliance forces. This was something utterly impossible. So, if they agreed, what was the harm? And thus, with a slow retreat by the Senate, and mainly due to the silence and fear of the majority, the few remaining senators who still wanted to resist were left confused and unsure what was happening. The motion passed. Even Marius was powerless to stop it. After the Senate session ended, Marius did not approach Knight. Instead, he left alone, expression clouded with gloom, pretending not to recognize him at all. He was no longer that ignorant young man from years ago. Nor was he that young man whose eyes once sparkled with awe for the hero Lister. He had worked so hard, struggled so long, just to one day sit in the consul's seat. And yet, that man had shown up and proved with sheer power that, if effort were enough, then why would the world need heroes? With just one hand, he covered the sky. By simply showing strength, the others bent without resistance. Even the terrifying girl, whose face they could barely see, could gouge out a senator's eyes with ease. And what if her target had been him? Marius shivered. In the face of overwhelming power, unless you were sleeping surrounded by the Roman legions, how could you ever sleep peacefully again? But when he thought of that radiant, domineering figure that descended like a new rising sun, Marius felt furious, bitter jealousy burning in his heart. Especially Lucius Caesar. Marius had begged him countless times to support him because of their family ties, because he had married into the Caesar family, because he was young Caesar's uncle. But Lucius Caesar, the old fox, had always looked down on Marius's humble roots. He chose neither Sulla nor Marius. If Lucius Caesar, this former consul, had backed him, Marius would have already crushed Sulla and ruled Rome with iron authority. And now, just when Marius was about to finally defeat Sulla, Lucius Caesar came back with that man and stood openly by his side. Marius was seething with madness. In the original history, when he realized he couldn't beat Sulla, he chose to take someone down with him, so, even before fleeing, he slaughtered Lucius Caesar's entire household. The uncle whom young Caesar admired most, killed the beloved uncle of his heart. In this alternate timeline, Marius was even more filled with resentment. No. Rome is mine. It can only belong to me. Just like in the history of the triumvirate, when a young Julius Caesar witnessed Pompey's triumphant return, bathed in glory, and awakened to a truth. A man must not be without soldiers or power. He gave away his daughter to Pompey, his own brother-in-law, just to gain a legion and wage war in Gaul. In the end, by force alone, he became unstoppable, and upon returning, even the godlike Pompey could not stand in his way. When you are strong, everyone fears your will. Your own power is your greatest capital. Not like now, fighting in Senate chambers, forming cliques and factions, because no matter whether it's Sulla's camp or Marius's. When night appeared, one sentence. Everyone became one voice. That kind of dominance made Marius burn with envy. And finally, he understood one truth. The importance of strength. Originally, Marius had always looked down on individual power. So what if one person was strong? Even mythological heroes could kill 10, 100, or 1,000 people. But what about an army of 10,000, 100,000, a million? As long as he could control Rome, implement a dictatorship, and have millions of Roman troops behind him, with endless young Romans ready to replenish the ranks. What hero couldn't be brought to heel? Power was what mattered most. However, what he saw today completely overturned his belief. Even someone with absolute political authority, if they were weak in personal strength, would still bow when their life was in danger. His so-called army couldn't protect him in time. In that moment, Marius felt an urgent desire. Something clicked in his mind. And he suddenly changed his route home, instead heading toward a beast arena favored by the nobles. Chapter 146, Crassus, Spartacus will absolutely satisfy your appetite. 1137 words. Crassus, one of the future triumvirs of Rome. Among the three, Pompey Magnus commanded Rome's military, he controlled its wealth, and young Caesar would emerge as a dark horse. Using Crassus's wealth and Pompey's military strength, Caesar eventually grew into a titan far beyond comparison. Together, the triumvirate ruled Rome for a long time, until Caesar laughed last, becoming the ultimate winner. Caesar the Great. They gave him power and resources, and people often forget the names of the ones who lost. But in fact, to even be called one of Rome's triumvirs, Crassus was anything but ordinary. At a young age, he had amassed enormous wealth through commerce. In Rome, many beast arenas, gambling houses, and other shadowy noble-pleasing venues were founded by Crassus. This old fox also knew how to invest, he wasn't afraid to spend on people with talent. And in an era where young Caesar had yet to rise, the most worthy investment in Rome was undoubtedly Marius, the man contending with Sulla for the crown of Rome's uncrowned king. When Marius arrived at Crassus's beast arena alone, the latter personally welcomed him. With a radiant smile, he asked his guest's purpose. Marius got straight to the point. He wanted slaves. Not just any slaves, but the kind who could fight lions, wolves, even conquer mountains and oceans, slaves capable of battling legendary monsters. Crassus's smile nearly froze on his face. Who? Is this guy asking for the moon? What the hell is he talking about? That's as good as saying nothing at all. Slaves? He just described Greek myth heroes. Heracles, before becoming a god, completed the 12 labors by fighting countless legendary beasts. A guy like that, how unlucky would he have to be to end up a slave? And if he was a slave, who the hell could keep him under control? Why not just say, hey, can I buy Zeus off you? Crassus couldn't help but say. You really know how to joke, my lord. While we do have some decent gladiators, they are still just gladiators. There's one called Hercules. And yes, we do have warriors who can take on lions and wolves. On the battlefield, they can fight 100 to 1. But they're pricey. That said, if it's you, I can do a special deal, buy one, get one free. But Marius shook his head. That level of warrior is strong, yes. But they're nothing compared to real heroes. He hadn't personally seen Lister Knight fight, but he'd heard the legends. He used to be his fanboy, after all. He'd heard the tale of the Ebro River. A single spear destroying an entire Spanish rebel base, an invulnerable steel body, frightening speed and stamina. After rearguard battling for days, he still had the energy to cross the Ebro River on foot. That kind of monster was basically Achilles reborn. Marius spoke. Can your warriors defeat someone with an invulnerable steel body? Crassus. No. Can they shatter a military base with a single spear strike? He suspected Marius had come here just to mess with him. Is this guy even human? It's a spear, not a catapult. How much strength would it take to throw something like that and cause such devastation? Seeing Marius's expression grow increasingly disappointed, Crassus suddenly thought of something and quickly spoke up. Right, perhaps there really is someone who fits Lord Marius's request. A new slave gladiator just came to mind. As a major slave owner and land magnate, Crassus had all kinds of strong slaves pass through the hands of his vast network every single day. The most outstanding ones would be selected and sent to his arena, where they would fight for his profits, earning him mountains of gold. Don't be fooled by his image as just a merchant. Crassus had built a slave empire of monstrous scale. In fact, in the future, when Rome would face a massive slave uprising, and its regular forces were too stretched thin from fighting wars on multiple fronts, they hired Crassus to suppress the rebellion with his own slave army. And the leader of those rebel slaves? The legendary warrior who fought for freedom, Spartacus. Even though Crassus wasn't a military genius, he had money and resources, and an army big enough to grind Spartacus into the ground. By that point, Spartacus had raised an army of over 100,000, sweeping across Rome like a storm. But Crassus, through sheer financial and numerical pressure, crushed the rebellion. It could be said that the resources at his disposal rivaled, if not exceeded, those of the Senate or the Roman legions themselves. Which meant, if you were looking for strong warriors, you were more likely to find them in Crassus's holdings than anywhere else. After all, among slaves, there were always surprises, particularly those captured from Greece, Sparta, or other lands, some of whom carried faint divine bloodlines in their veins. As long as their potential was triggered, they might even become true heroes. When Marius asked eagerly who it was, Crassus spoke. Spartacus. A Thracian warrior. When he first arrived at the arena, he snapped one of our stone pillars in half and used it as a weapon. Then casually bashed in the skull of a lion. You should know just how thick and heavy that pillar of mine was, right, my lord? That guy's strength is like a monster's. No matter what enemy you're facing, I doubt anyone could survive a direct hit from that thing. In fact, if you used that thing as a throwing weapon, it could absolutely smash a group of soldiers to death in one go. That might just count as blasting apart an enemy camp with a single spear, right? But Crassus still felt a bit hesitant. That monster-like warrior, even if you chained him with dozens of steel locks, he still felt incredibly unsafe and unreliable. And yet, for some reason, Spartacus had been very well behaved. Despite possessing strength akin to a hero out of myth, a little Heracles, he had shown no will to resist. Crassus always had the feeling this man was scheming something. Was it really okay to hand this thing over to Lord Marius? What if it backfired? On the other hand, Marius, hearing Crassus's description, also sucked in a breath. Sure, the feats didn't sound quite as legendary as those of Knight. But after all, legends are mostly exaggerated anyway. Just imagining that strength, smashing down onto a human skull, made Marius shudder. Even if Knight had an invulnerable steel-like body, sure, maybe his skin could take the blow, but were his organs made of metal too? If he were caught off guard and took one full strike from this monster, could that finally kill Lister Knight? At this thought, Marius was tempted. Chapter 147, The most expensive things are always free. 1,184 words. As Crassus relayed the details about Spartacus, he had no idea that this calm, obedient man would someday bring disaster to Rome. Starting with dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of followers, eventually growing into a scarlet storm of hundreds of thousands in mere months. And Crassus himself would become Spartacus's mortal enemy, using Spartacus's severed head as a stepping stone for his political rise. Even now, Crassus just had a gut feeling that Spartacus was hiding something. Because someone with that kind of power, yet content to live as a slave, it made no sense. But Marius didn't care about any of that. He didn't care what Spartacus was hiding. All he needed to know was, This man could fight. And if he was going to strike, it had to be soon. The other senators might be unclear on Lister Knight's power, but Marius, as a former fanboy, had no doubt at all. If that man won a few more victories, gained control of Rome's military, and even acquired a private army stationed in the capital, how would that be any different from having an imperial guard? In the East, eunuchs or ministers with control of the imperial guard had dared to assassinate emperors outright. Rome would be no different. In fact, worse. There had even been a time when the Praetorian Guard killed the emperor and auctioned off the throne publicly. A distant army can't save you. Whoever controlled the Praetorian Guard under your feet held the initiative. If they went mad, no one could stop them from killing anyone. Marius deeply coveted such power. If it were he who could raise a private army, he'd gladly throw both hands up and scream yes. But now, idle or not, anyone who held power strong enough to threaten his position had to die. He was no longer that naive boy, dreaming of chasing someone else's shadow. Dreams mean nothing, not in the face of ambition and power. And Spartacus would be the blade he wielded to strike at that mountain-like figure. "I want this man, how much gold?" Marius asked in a low, firm voice. "No gold," Crassus replied, flashing a radiant smile. "No gold?" Marius blinked in surprise. "I already warned you, my lord. If you still want to use him, then if anything happens, I'm not taking responsibility. Although I don't know what you plan to do with him, I'd like to offer you a favor. Not just Spartacus, I can also throw in a batch of strong Spartan and Thracian warriors." As a seasoned investor, Crassus was a man of bold moves. In the future, he would invest nearly several times the value of the Athenian treasury into Caesar without even blinking. He was ruthless like that. A man who could climb so high naturally wasn't some philanthropist, he had sharp eyes for potential. Long ago, he had already noticed the talents of Marius, Cinna, Lucius, and Sulla. And ultimately, he placed his bet on Marius, believing that he would emerge the victor. Crassus was gambling. Gambling that Marius would become the next consul of Rome. And even though the consulship was usually held jointly, the reality was, once someone attained that position, they could do as they pleased. Especially someone like Marius, who held real power. Once he became consul, even the Senate would be filled with his people. Whatever he proposed, as long as it didn't touch the senators' core interests, no one would object. That would be Crassus's time to collect. With Marius's name at his back, he could become one of the most powerful men in Rome. Of course, that was based on the previous state of Roman politics. What Crassus didn't know was that his information was already outdated. Because of one man's return, Rome's upper ranks were now in complete turmoil. Marius said darkly, "What is it you want from me?" He had seen through Crassus's intentions. In this young man's eyes, there was ambition, his own kind of hunger. There's no such thing as a free deal. Every free gift already has a price tag hidden in the shadows. I want nothing, only to gain your friendship, my lord. Crassus smiled brightly. "Little fox." Marius couldn't see through this smiling slave owner, he was absolutely watertight. Friendship, huh? A favor owed is the most expensive debt of all. Harder to repay than anything else. If it were any other time, Marius might have restrained himself. But now, he really did need powerful warriors. A pleasure doing business. You've earned the friendship of Gaius Marius. To a fruitful alliance. Asterisk. The two foxes, one old, one young, smiled knowingly at one another. To celebrate their budding friendship, Crassus insisted on having Marius enjoy some of the amenities of his arena. Spartacus would be delivered soon, as one of Crassus's gifts. Meanwhile, elsewhere, completely unaware that someone had already begun scheming against him, Knight went about his own business. Of course, even if he did know, he wouldn't care about Marius's plotting. The warrior who would one day liberate the slaves, Spartacus, may have had monstrous strength. Not just in Rome, even in Greece, he might be hailed as a hero. But the version of knight that Marius understood was already outdated. Knight first returned to his own villa estate, organizing his loyal slave warriors to form the first official unit of his private army. When these slaves heard that they'd already be marching to battle soon to earn merit and glory, they were thrilled. For the first time, they felt truly secure in their hearts. Their master hadn't lied to them. He really did plan to raise them as soldiers, not treat them like the other arrogant, heartless nobles who threw slaves into arenas for sport. That moment solidified their loyalty and their enthusiasm during training soared. With the backing of Lucius Caesar. And before leaving the Caesar family estate, Knight also squeezed quite a bit of money out of the great Caesar himself. He sent Ella and Amy to purchase a massive quantity of vegetables and meat. Knight had high standards for his private army. Money could always be made again. But turning that money into combat power was the best investment. He would never shortchange the warriors who followed him. After all, how can you grow strong if you don't eat meat? Among these slave warriors, especially the Spartans, Knight held high expectations. If these Spartans could awaken even a trace of the demigod bloodline within them, no matter how faint, that alone would grant them hero-level physique and combat ability. The sheer ferocity of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, holding off tens of thousands of Persian soldiers, who wouldn't envy that kind of power? Imagine going into battle with an army like that, talk about dramatic entrances. But how exactly could he stimulate that Spartan bloodline to awaken? Knight couldn't help but think to himself. If only I could bring them to the Trojan War battlefield for a training session. Say what you will. But there's nothing that unlocks potential better than life or death crisis. Chapter 148, If you don't die training, keep pushing. For the scratched-out master, woman. 1,272 words. The Trojan War, now that was a battle truly filled with heroes. Those who were even slightly weaker wouldn't survive long, unable to see the sun of the next day. And if they could be brought to the Greece of the Age of Gods, where the magical ether in the atmosphere was denser, a little stimulation might naturally awaken these Spartans. But unfortunately, these slave warriors were not part of Knight's own abilities. His 43 Ebro River warriors could only bring a specific group of 43 people into the simulated universe, belonging to his own power, while the slaves were external entities. However, since a breakthrough in quality was temporarily out of reach, he would make up for it with quantity. Before, Knight had no money, and the number of strong warriors under his command was still too few, with only 3 Spartans. Now that he had money, it sparked the idea of purchasing more Spartans. He also wanted to form a group of 300 Spartan warriors to play around with. Before setting off, Knight gathered the slaves together, and announced something to them. I'm very pleased to see that in just a few days, your spirit and energy have recovered, showing a brand new appearance. But merely regaining your vigor is not enough. I need you to become even stronger. Soon, I will lead you to the battlefield to face armies of tens of thousands, even millions of allied forces. In the future, I will take you to fight the Gauls, the Britons, and on their sacred lands of faith, we will crush their god statues beneath our feet and plant Roman spears across their lands. Those who cannot keep up with my pace, I will abandon without hesitation, removing them from the ranks of warriors to become mere farmers. I know you all crave to achieve great deeds, to regain your freedom, and even to marry, have children, and build your own glory with your own hands. But I must also tell you, only the truly strong deserve to have it all. Soon. Next, I will bring you a group of new companions. Among these companions, there will be many as strong as you, or even stronger, Spartans, Thracians, Italians. I will also buy many female slaves. For the one among you who performs the most outstandingly, I will personally grant them a marriage, allowing you to settle down and build a family on my estate, on my land. 7 days from now, I will personally test your strength. The top 10 performers, or those who show enough progress to satisfy me, will all be rewarded with women. As Knight's words fell, not only the warlike Spartans and Thracians but even the ordinary, robust Italian warriors had a fiery glint in their knights. Their blood boiled, ignited with burning fighting spirit. Women! When the master said this, they were no longer sleepy. Could there be a more real reward than this? For people who were already slaves, to be able to have women, to reproduce, and even to eat meat every day now, doing nothing but training hard. Damn it, Tilda! With such great conditions, if they didn't strive to become stronger, they'd be letting themselves down, were they even human. Knight saw the desire in the slaves' knights, a strong craving that could also translate into fierce fighting spirit. And it made him very satisfied. And he wasn't lying to these slaves. In the coming days, Knight would indeed go to purchase some female slaves, but naturally, they wouldn't be delicate, beautiful women with soft skin who looked like noble ladies. Instead, they would be ordinary women. And strong, robust female warriors capable of fighting. Powerful female warriors were a formidable force in their own right, and their strong physical qualities, when paired with mighty Spartan or Thracian warriors, would naturally produce offspring who wouldn't be weak by any means. According to Roman law, these children would also become Knight's private property. Once they grew up, they could join his army and fight for him. Of course. Even without him saying it, the slave warriors knew full well that their master wouldn't go out of his way to buy beautiful women for them. In their situation, having any women at all was already a blessing. After Knight bid farewell to his slaves, the slave warriors, spurred by his encouragement, became highly motivated and almost frenzied, starting to train harder on their own to become stronger. Before leaving, their master had said he wouldn't just buy female slaves but also bring a group of new warriors to be their companions. But with more mouths to feed and limited rewards, having more companions wasn't necessarily a good thing. Everyone wanted a taste of a woman, but there were only 10 spots. Compared to the newcomers, they had already been resting for a few days, their bodies healthier and giving them an edge. If, after their master's clear guidance, they still couldn't secure all 10 spots, then these self-proclaimed true warriors might as well bash their heads against a block of tofu and die. Train, train like mad. Push, push to the limit. If it doesn't kill them, push until it does. With ample food, a nutrient-rich diet, and their robust physical potential, under high-intensity training, the strength of these slave warriors began to soar. Especially the 3 Spartan warriors, their progress in just half a day was so significant that their strength saw a qualitative leap. Back in Sparta, before they were captured, they had never experienced such good food and clothing. Now, with proper nutrition and intense training, their strength naturally grew rapidly. Until they reached the growth limit of their Spartan bloodline, their progress would remain swift. The warriors competed with each other in feats of strength, sparring matches, and endurance training, creating a fiery and intense atmosphere. Knight's maids, Amy and Ella, watched all of this from the sidelines, startled by the barbaric, frenzied energy, and kept their distance. They had also heard his proclamation earlier and were shocked that a group of slaves, upon hearing about women, could erupt with such passionate zeal and fighting spirit. Were these the same slaves they remembered, those under farmers and slave masters, who were supposed to be lifeless and filled with despair? But soon, thinking about their own situation, how they were supposed to be slaves but now lived more like housekeepers or maids with growing hope for the future, they reflected. Amy, it seems we really found a good master. Ella, our master is the kindest. Ua, I wonder which lucky woman will become the future mistress. I'm so jealous I could go mad. Amy looked at her and sighed. You're telling me? The twins chatted quietly, not hiding their little feelings for their master. But knowing their status made it impossible for them to become the mistress, they were truly jealous to the point of madness over the future mistress. By the way, it seemed like today they saw their master return with a woman following him. Although the girl's face was hidden by a bright red hood, her delicate, fair skin and curvaceous figure left no doubt that she was a beauty. This sparked a sense of urgency in the twins. Their master was so desirable, had someone already beaten them to him? Should they take the initiative? At the very least, they desperately wanted to compete for their master's first experience. Who said only men could be lustful? When they saw a man they liked and admired, their own desires flared up too. Don't underestimate a woman's initiative. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Sally Fox audiobook.